great day because we have two amazing guests. Our first guest is Dr. Michael V. Roberts. And I'm a little bit stunned that he's also an excellency, and he's going to be sharing with us later how he received that title. Also, as an elected public official and business owner, he will be here chatting with us from his hometown of Detroit, where it's very, very warm there too. I just want to say a little bit about him. He was featured in Black Enterprise magazine, Forbes magazine. We can also have seen him on PBS's Nightly Business Report and many of the cable news stations like CNN and Fox Business News. And so we are we feel such relief and an honor to have such an honorable person here on our airwaves in upstate New York. Welcome, Michael, Dr. Michael Roberts. Yeah, and I'm just gonna call you Michael because I'm not really good with all the terms.
Well, let's not stand on formalities. Thank you very much, both Kimberly and Randy. It's a pleasure to be on your show. I've done a lot of great shows, and yours apparently will be one of the greatest because you guys are engaging in our community. You have a voice that is respected, and people listen to you. So I congratulate you on the work you've done to build that reputation and that capability. Kimberly, I got to correct you. I'm actually in Detroit at my Detroit hotel, but my home is St. Louis.
Oh, sorry.
So those who know me know that I'm a St. Louis born and bred guy. But remember, when you're from Missouri, that's the show me state. So everything I do, I like to be able to prove it. And I like for people to be able to prove what they say they could do, especially in this business world that we live in. So I thank you guys for inviting me to come on the air, and we'll have some fun today.
I think so, because today's topic is all about business. And I think a lot of lessons, there are a lot of takeaways from the election, and some good, some bad. But I think that business, especially Black business and business of people of color, is one of the most important topics when it comes to income equality or inequality. But achieving equality, we need Black businesses in order to make that happen. And a lot of things that happened during this election cycle really pointed to some of the misunderstandings, especially comments by Jared and a variety of people, pointed to a fundamental misunderstanding, I think, of Black entrepreneurs and what our capabilities and capacities are. And so you are a gentleman that's been able to build quite a prolific career, not only in the hotel business, but a number of different businesses. And can you give us a little bit of a background of your journey, kind of where you came from and what got you interested in being an entrepreneur?
Well, I've been an entrepreneur since, I guess, I was a little kid, selling items and having fun in exchanges. When I went to college, I was selling dashikis in bookstores. When I went to law school, I was continuing to find ways to make a couple of pennies here and there to put myself through law school. And when I graduated, I moved 2 blocks from the projects where I lived for 10 years and was elected to the St. Louis City Council. We call them aldermen in St. Louis. I started building my businesses, which actually grew to over 100 companies. Over the years that I've been in business, I've employed over 11,000 people, 99% were Black. I've owned 14 hotels, a dozen full-power TV stations, a radio station. I was the first Black to be elected to the board of directors of the International Council of Shopping Centers, which is a very broad-based group of all the shopping centers and strip centers in the world, and very controlled by a very close-knit group of business people. I broke through to become the first African-American on their board, which was quite interesting for me because we literally traveled in parts of the world looking at shopping centers and getting a better understanding of that. I also at one point owned with my brother over 3 city blocks in downtown St. Louis, where we converted them into many of the office buildings into residential developments. I also built a wireless phone company. It was back when the digital world was becoming alive. People probably will remember when the coolest person in the theater had a great big suitcase with a phone in it. It was one of those big analog phones, the snap, crackle, drop. If you remember that, how sometimes you could barely hear anybody, but that's how it was. But I had a vision, I had a perspective on the future and recognized that digital phones will be the wave of the future. Of course, that's what we all have, in our hands and pockets now. That company ended up, we developed it. We were the only blacks, probably in history, to actually build a phone company. And we actually had stores, and we ultimately we became an affiliate of Sprint. We took the company public and sold it for about $300 million. We were written up in Forbes for that. But it's interesting because the caption on that article in Forbes kind of threw off some of the guys who were also going public with their company. The caption was, "You got to fake it till you make it."
Oh.
So some of the white guys are trying to ask me, well, what does that really mean? I said, well, in my community, that's what we call it. Now, in your community, you call it dress for success and voodoo economics. Where I'm from, we call it fake it till you make it.
Yeah,
Which probably can let you know that I keep things real no matter who I'm dealing with and at what level. But one of the things we learned in selling some of our TV stations to help fund the wireless phone company was when you sell things, you got to really determine what is it that they're interested in. For example, if you want to buy my TV station in Memphis or in wherever we may have had it, Raleigh-Durham or some of the cities, Jackson, Mississippi, other places, that a buyer of a TV station really just wants to buy the spectrum. So as a real estate developer, we would keep the offices and the towers and have them lease the towers back to us. So strategically, we became ultimately, by keeping our towers, the towers we built for the wireless phone company, we became the second largest non-public tower company in America. And then we subsequently sold that to American Tower because the big public companies need to buy groups of towers in order to grow and sustain a relationship with their stockholders. Many of those transactions led us to look closely at the hotel business, where we started to buy hotels one after another. And like many businesses, by 2018, we began to feel the same hit that most businesses that were large and small felt. And I bring that up on purpose, Randy and Kimberly, because no matter how successful you may be, things shift and you have to be prepared to handle the downside as well as enjoying the upside. I had my own private jets. I'm still the largest developer in the Bahamas in terms of residential development. We sold our jets. We sold many of our hotels, because we had to realize that when you have an economic downturn, you have to pivot, you have to be realistic, and you have to protect your back end. So we went through that series of changes, and then we still continued on, and we still continue on to today. So one of the questions I think we have to raise, which is something you and I spoke about before we came on, was what are we going to do as Black businesses post-COVID?
Right.
And I must tell you that there's plenty of changes. There's
Well, no,
there's
you've been fortunate enough to be able to sort of see the future and sort of kind of get a glimpse of where technology can lead. And we spoke about the opportunities, like where there's disruption, there are opportunities potentially. So what do you see as some of the emerging opportunities that are interesting for new businesses to look at, especially young entrepreneurs of color?
Like me.
Yeah, well, let me just say that a lot of industries will blow up in the future because of this disruption in the future. You know, we can start with electric cars. And when was the last time you actually read a newspaper? Where do you get your news today?
Right.
Everything is becoming automated in the future. Energy will move from fossil fuels, you know, to renewable energy sources. Money will change. Blockchain technology already has made it possible for peer-to-peer transactions. The Bitcoin and thousands of other cryptocurrencies are already in play. Humans are going to be living longer. How is that? Well, usually when you die, it's because one of your organs went bad. There are human parts already being made, and this will only improve. So artificial intelligence is already around us. Once you only had what I would call manual tools, but today, you know, it's mechanical tools. I'm certainly just describing these evolutions that take place. You know, cars used to be assembled by people. Now they're assembled by robotic arms, right?
Right.
So what I would define as task-oriented jobs, if you will go away by at least 50% by 2030. So
Right.
half of the people, as we know it, will be unemployed unless they begin to attach to those types of industries that are emerging. And there are many. I guess a simple example
So now you wrote a book on
is
this. Now
there was a time.
you actually wrote interestingly enough, you actually wrote a book on this that chronicles some of these movements and market disruptions and opportunities.
So I think that was his second book. That kind of
Yes.
jumpstart from his
Yeah.
first one.
What was that? What was the title of the book? Let our audience know what the title of that book was or is.
Well, it can be found. Hopefully, people will buy it at a black bookstore and have them order it. And if not, just go to Amazon. It's Action Has No Season 2.0. How the actionaire develops all possibilities. Now, what is the actionaire? The actionaire is a word that I coined in my first book, and it's one who takes their ideas, their dreams, their vision, and their passion, and they pursue them with courage and confidence and bravado. You know, the actionaire is a person that has eliminated the fear of failure, for example. And I ask your audience today, what would your life be like if you could eliminate the fear of failure? How many ideas did you actually have in your mind today or yesterday and only found that those same ideas somebody else picked up and made millions of dollars on your idea just a few months, a few years later? So fear, this kind of be philosophical for a minute. Fear is a mental construct, right? You weren't born with fear. You develop that through your culture and your environment. And I submit to you that you could eliminate it by just taking it out of your mindset. Second word, failure. I also submit to you there's no such thing as failure.
Agreed.
You might ask, well, what do I mean by that? Every day when you wake up, you're given 86,400 seconds. That's 24 hours, okay? And the moment you think of the moment, it's already gone. Now, all of us have experienced, I'm sure, where businesses didn't make it as we would have liked. Maybe even marriages didn't make it as we would like. The question becomes, was that a failure or was that an experience? Where the outcome wasn't as you liked, but I gained from the experience. So if you could begin to take those types of experiences, recognize that they are learning experiences, and take away this negative concept of failure, you could begin to become more of an actionaire. You could begin to look at things in a different light by
So Michael,
eliminating the fear of failure.
can I jump in here because you were talking
I'm
about
sorry,
learning,
Kimberly?
and I recognize your second text. Your book is a training manual, a manual of sorts. Would you recommend this type of material be available in schools so that our youth, our young people can be more confident and do as you had suggested, not lead with fear and not feel bad if they don't succeed initially, because they don't fail if they don't stop doing what they want to do, from what I'm understanding you're saying. How would we use the community to help facilitate the knowledge that you're sharing?
Well, I thank you, and you're so correct. Fortunately, first book and soon my second book has been utilized in some of our HBCU colleges, and they're recognizing that the fact that we've done the level of business that we've done over the years, and that I took the time to write 2 books, creating a chronology that was necessary, if you will, to succeed. And I'm hoping everybody out here who listens, you all have stories, good stories, interesting stories. And I would hope that everybody takes a moment and jot down and write a book and bring out your story so that people don't continue to perhaps relive some of the challenges that you lived, but at the same time overcame. So I just think that, as I said in the book, the actionaire develops all possibilities. I want people to look at and realize that there's so many new possibilities that are coming out of this new world. I mentioned living longer. There's 3D devices that are currently really literally rebuilding parts of your organs. When you die, a human usually dies because one of their organs goes bad. But what if, in the future, they're able to replace them? They can already replace synthetic ears and nose and other components of your body. So but who's learning this technology? Who's developing this technology? Over the next 10 years, we're going to see different forms of transportation changing. Autonomous cars will take over. Food, healthcare, insurance, education, banking, electricity, housing, all of these things are in play right now. And we can take on any one of them or many of them and develop new businesses. We have to be very creative. We have to, how many times have people ask you, do you think outside the box? And in my speeches, I'll ask people, do you think outside the box? Raise your hand. And sure enough, most of the people in the room raises their hand. Then
Can I say something right here? I kind of think, though, when we, thinking of our audience, when we ask members of a Black community to think outside the box, I kind of see their moms hitting their upside the head or something like that. People seem to want their children to do the tried and true, the doctor, the lawyer, the teacher, the preacher. What kind of solutions would they be? I mean, what kind of speeches could you give to someone like that to say, hey, let your child, be very open and, give their interests and learn something about cryptocurrency and AI? Because I know a lot of young people right now in the school districts, they're engaged in the technology, but I don't know if we are really streamlining them into those types of businesses that you're suggesting. It's still, more technical, more mechanical in the sense that, automobile. And I know that we're going to have a guest on later who's in our community, and he will be very fruitful with his understanding of what we share with our community members, and as far as what they're able to do in Hudson and environs. I know for one thing, Amazon came up here, came north, and they're using all this technology that you're talking about, but that's not engaging people in employment. What do you say to these businesses? I know you've employed, like you said, so many different people. How could they look to support what you're saying?
Well, let me go back then for a moment. When I ask people about this thinking outside the box, the first thing I say to them is, there's no such thing as a box. Oh. And that you almost philosophically put yourself in a position. I'll ask the question, what's the size of your box? I know kids in the hood who's a jail cell is their box. That's all they know. They may end up there or in a casket. The reality is there's only the horizon. There's no such thing as a box. And if we recognize that, as I said, half of the jobs that you know today are basically task-oriented jobs, those tasks will be substituted by artificial intelligence from robotics by the year 2030, which means half of our population will be unemployed, unless we start to look at the micro businesses that will be emerging through technology, and begin to recognize that there are many, many hundreds of businesses that will be surfacing as a result of technology in the future. But the future is really now, and we have to make sure that our young people are recognizing it so they're not blindsided, 20 years from now, wondering, well, what were the elders teaching me to just do the same thing that they were doing when all of that is no longer in existence? So we don't want to be blindsided by things that are coming in the future. In my book, I did 2 chapters, one on artificial intelligence, machine learning, and robotics, and one on cryptocurrency and a blockchain. Understanding the blockchain is the newest form of gathering data on literally everything that exists, and it's like creating a ledger sheet that's put into a computer database that's looked at by thousands, if not millions, of computers nationwide. So it cannot be hacked. It's impervious, and it can be protected, because if somebody tries to take one line out of that ledger, all the other computers will fill it back in again. So what does that mean? That means that if I'm going to buy a piece of property in Indonesia, I can look into blockchain, into the database, identify who actually owns it, be able to do a complete evaluation of it, and then take the owner and send them cryptocurrency to make the purchase of the property and have it transferred. And what did we just do? We eliminated title companies, right, banks,
a lot of middlemen,
lawyers,
yes,
all the transactional people that's in between, because now we're going peer to peer, person to person. And in the future, that is the way transactions will take place.
So then they can't be lawyer. Well, you're a lawyer.
I'm sorry?
I said, you're a lawyer. So you're saying that these positions, like having a lawyers and things, that's not the way forward for some of our youth.
No, what I'm saying is in certain transactions, we're going to see the elimination of certain jobs, including legal or medical. For example, we're going to see these sensor microchips that's going to be installed in your body and around your mirror. And one day in the future, you're going to be able to look at the mirror and say, mirror, mirror on the wall, what's wrong with me? I don't feel well. The mirror will then do a diagnostic and will send it to RoboDoc. RoboDoc will then evaluate what they're seeing from those sensor microchips that's being sent to them. They will prescribe a certain medicine for you The RoboDoc will then send it to RoboPharmacy. RoboPharmacy will then pull up the necessary drugs that you might need for your illness. They will then call the local drone company, who will then pick up that drug and apply it to your house. And then your robot probably will take it, bring it to you, and along with water or whatever you're going to need to take with it. And that's the future. And believe me, we're not that far away from things like that.
You're right.
If you look at for example, virtual reality glasses, Randy, you know okay, when you put those on, you feel like you're skydiving or scuba diving or something along that line. Well, virtual reality is just moving you into what's called augmented reality. And at some point, all the data that's in your cell phone, and mind you, if some of us have received, say, a Christmas card or a birthday card, and when you open it up, the card sings happy birthday to you. Well, that little chip that does that was more powerful than all the computer data capability in World War II. That one little chip that you throw away in a trash can. So imagine for a moment the fact that you have your cell phone where you can pull up data from all over the world. And I don't know how many of us remember phone numbers anymore, but we probably just ask our phone to make a certain phone call or give us direction. Now imagine the ability to take that phone and reduce it to the size of a microchip and implant that in your brain. Now all of a sudden you have infinite knowledge in your brain, and you have all of the capabilities right there. You remember Google had those Google glasses? Remember those Google glasses?
Oh, yeah, and then there's some companies that knocked them off too. Some companies also try to do those types of glasses.
Well, the concept is that those glasses basically provided you with unlimited data. Now imagine if those became contact lenses, and you could just close your eyes and envision yourself skydiving someday. Or if that chip is actually in your brain and you become a cyborg. Now I'm gonna give you the dark side of this. Let's assume in the future you have this kind of technology that's available to you, but all of a sudden there comes these brain hackers, and now your brain gets hacked and you start doing things that you don't even know what you're doing.
Well, that sounds like a
we
movie.
Have to be very careful.
Well,
but
that leads us to the fact that, as Kimberly said, you have to teach kids to think beyond conventional thinking and not just sort of settle for pre-existing jobs and roles because they most likely won't be the jobs of the future. However, with an entrepreneur, every problem is an opportunity. And so, as you say, all those steps along the line of sort of integrating, a more technological solutions into people's physiology or their everyday lives, it's going to have all these series of problems and issues. And that's where the entrepreneur has the opportunity to then make money by being that, if you as an engineer, that systems integrator who then helps solve those problems, because there's never a one-size-fits-all solution that works for everyone. So there's always these elements of the population that do need this levels of specialization. And that's where entrepreneurs, even on a small scale, can deploy technology and become that middle person that is able to then corner a market, or create a niche market for themselves. And you've been able to do that, I think on a large scale and a small scale. But how does a small entrepreneur? I mean, like Bitcoin had a thing like years ago, and I don't know if it's still going on, where people were actually building these high-powered machines, and these high-powered machines would be caching and taking all this information and then interlacing all this information so that the blockchain transactional record could be affected across many different machines, and they would get Bitcoin in return for running these machines. again, the entrepreneurs, many smart young kids built these very fast machines and had, these server farms and were able to make a business out of it. What do you see for the entrepreneur who is not hugely tech oriented, but wants to get into technology and develop something as a niche that they can then run with and build, as you did, a series of companies based on the success of integrating success from one to the next to the next?
All right, well, let's look at it philosophically first. Things are going to change no matter what. And either you control the change or the change will control you. So when you change the way you look at things, things you look at will change.
Mm-hmm.
For example, all of us are seeing drones now. Okay, we see the drones the kids are playing with, adults are playing with. But let's look at what may happen with drones in the future. If our young folks get adapted at being able to fly them, eventually every police station in the world will need drones. Every fire department will need drones, because they'll take those drones and they'll look at criminal situations in buildings. They'll look at locations of where fires may be coming to avoid humans from being in that position. You're going to see organized sporting teams, forestry departments, power plants, ski resorts, college campuses, airports, farmers, construction companies,
Yep.
shipping docks, theme parks, military installation, prisons, weather monitoring stations. All of that's going to have drone-related businesses. So as we give rise to drones and command centers, what we'll be able to do is see a ton of people globally now being able to develop their businesses in their own niche and be able to sell it. That's not a hard thing to do. I mean, in other words, it's creative. We're going to see thousands of these things flying around someday. But what piece of the action will we have? For example, if you're a farming company and you want to study the condition of soil, you can send a drone out all over your hundreds, if not thousands of acres of land and be able to get measurements from it. Drones can be used in someday taxi service, the larger ones. And they're going to be literally picking you up and taking you to a new location at some point. Autonomous cars will be doing the same thing on the road. So we're going to see Uber and Lyft begin to go out of business as we know it, at least the drivers, because we're going to have these driverless vehicles that will be picking us up. But somebody's got to repair them. They still have to be maintained. They still have to get programmed. And there will be just millions of those vehicles out here. So there still will be some traditional types of task-oriented businesses that will be necessary, even though we're seeing this emergence of technology.
Well, I agree.
One of the things that I found interesting is we see a lot of kids that, sorry?
No, I agree, and I suspect that like Uber and Lyft, their future plans is really just to have drive to survive as a company. They're going to deploy these autonomous driving vehicles, and they just won't have any drivers. They'll just take the calls because they have the infrastructure that's built. And a lot of people, as you're pointing out, don't understand that they're participating in their own obsolescence in many ways. I mean, they're forming the bridge between, an app and the consumer. But once robotics and automation takes place, they'll be easily displaced. So, I grew up and I'm an electrical engineer. Is now something that you're recommending for students and maybe all entrepreneurs and continue learning to have an engineering or a programming or coding degree? Because you can use big data to, like, say, analyze what's happening on the farm, analyze trends, analyze a great deal of information that can then give you some predictive abilities that you wouldn't have. And you don't have to have a supercomputer because, now you can use a lot of services to do that. So is that some of your, as well as, let's say, learning your craft? If you made jewelry, how do you get people now technologically savvy enough to now take advantage of these new marketplaces and opportunities?
We just have to do it. We have to, it's like anything else. Back in the days when cotton was being picked by hand, people freaked out when the cotton gin came along. But what happened is they moved north because at the same time, automobile assembly plants were being built and parts for those cars were being built. So it was a migration and a reorientation of what's important and who you are. So,
but should our school districts be demanding more? But should our school districts then be demanding to have more technologically oriented classes in high school so that kids can come out with, with a better, knowledge of what's happening? I mean, you got a lot of kids that are on the consumer side that know the front end of a phone or of an application, but have no idea of the back end. Matter of fact, I was just lamenting the fact that there's no Radio Shacks. As an engineer, I used to go to Radio Shack like every other week, to facilitate what I wanted to do. As a matter of fact, I was looking for a power supply for something and seeing if I didn't have it. And I was thinking, oh, well, if the Radio Shack was here, I'd be able to go out and buy this power supply. But there's now sort of, and I can still get it online, but there's, the links between people knowing what these items do and using them is really extremely vast. Years ago, you could take apart your car. You could actually fix your car yourself. In today's computerized world, you can't fix your car. Unless, and it's nothing, it used to be plug and play. You can take things out and put things in. It's a lot more sophisticated. How do we get this sort of technical abilities now ramped up to meet these opportunities that are out there, in your opinion?
Well, let me say it this way. Right now is one of those moments in history when we can influence the future. Let me repeat that.
Okay.
Right now is one of those moments in history when we can influence the future. We have to have our young people become more educated in science, technology, engineering, and math. We have to move them into and we need our public schools to begin to think broadly about what's going on in the future. And yet, one of the things that is one of the biggest potential businesses that's forthcoming is in the gaming business, in what's called esports.
Yep.
You've seen our kids sitting at home playing these games, right?
And making money. Okay.
Did you know that this business is worth $140 billion right now? And with a projection of 300 billion by 2025.
And barely existed just are 5 years ago.
Exactly. So my point is, who's playing those games? Look at the age of the, and people like, I believe, Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan and others are beginning to develop teams. And those teams are competing. And guess what? In the future, I envision that esports will be in two specific areas. One, the Olympics, and two, in gaming or Vegas. Then we're going to see actual gaming competition in casinos, and you're going to have probably an estimate of 2.5 billion gamers worldwide ready to compete against each other. That they will be paid out $150 billion by probably within the next 2 to 3 years.
Well, now the other aspect to that is that, with computers and again, with artificial intelligence, you can have machines so smart that gamers can't really beat them. They can maybe beat each other, and that's what it, and people like Steve Jobs, and also, I don't know if Microsoft or Bill Gates had mentioned it, but they also indicate a lot of danger with this sort of intersection between artificial intelligence and machine learning, and saying and dictating what's good for us, and us actually being able to control or have some measure of control over our lives. So there are these technological milestones that we can reach, but are they really beneficial to our civilization and our lives? Which is a different question than the economic opportunities, but it is a philosophical question. But before we head
Well,
into
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that goes back to what I said earlier about brain hackers. You know, it sounds scary in many ways, but listen, there are certain things that are coming that we're not going to be able to stop. The best thing for us to do is control it. Machine learning learns based on an algorithm and data that's put in. Nothing compares to the frontal lobe of the human brain, which is the creative side, the side that can actually draw a picture and not just copy something, that can show love and compassion. Robots won't probably ever be able to show that. They can emulate it perhaps, but they can't really feel it like the human. So we have to somehow be able to make sure that the manufacturers and the service management, all of this will triple, in 10 years. That those business opportunities will have to have that human touch to it, and recognize that there are some dangers.
Absolutely, and
that can go. Yes.
And getting people of color into coding, one of the aspects is that, so much of these algorithms that we're speaking about are being programmed with a specific bias, either conscious or unconscious. And there are many groups of Black coders that are, look at these algorithms for either purchasing real estate or selling different things that carry out this bias, but it's an algorithm. So you think, well, the machine said, or the formula said this, and it actually is very prejudicial. So if you don't have people of color at the table and at these companies to look over and look at this code, you can have all this embedded bias and racism built into these algorithms and codes. So you need representation. People need to be at the table. Well, we're going to pick this up. We're approaching the 5 o'clock hour, and sometimes we get a news break in between. And this is a great conversation, because you're really talking about the heart of the future and where people need to look toward pivoting their skills. And we have on the other side of this, we're talking technology. We have Mr. Bill Hughes coming up in the 5 o'clock hour, in addition to talk about some of the medicinal and other opportunities that are out there for young people to take advantage of and to learn, and to perhaps make millions of dollars by being part of these emerging industries. And I'm not going to tell you what it is. You may already know, but we're going to save that to 5 o'clock or beyond to when we talk to Bill. But so you were saying, and
may I jump in? I just wanted to make sure that we also look at community. Community is also government, and looking at going back to the Biden-Harris government, what I would like to ask, what might be those advantages to having this newly installing democratic government? I know when in the past we used to talk a lot about public-private partnerships, and would that be something that this new technology can build on in this type of new government? And with Bill, I know that he was an alderman in Hudson back a while ago, and you, Michael, you were an alderman in your hometown of St. Louis. So how might government be effective in bringing forth these types of the elements that you were talking about to help in this changing of the guard, so to speak, in business? and know that schools are doing it. You know, schools have the STEM program, or now they're calling it STEAM because they're adding in art, because art is never going to go away as long as you have anything remotely to do with technology. So can we talk a little bit about the government aspect, and maybe we can bring in Bill after and have you guys even converse a little bit, should you have any questions that you might, or statements you might want to share with each other, being both an alderman in your hometowns.
Yes.
I'll start with Michael. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Okay. Well, let me just say this, that most technology, as we know it, everywhere from the digital phone business to robotics, really all got started with military funding. Just like we're seeing how much money is going into trying to find cures for the coronavirus. Billions of dollars are being spent with private industry to find ways to cure that our dreaded disease today. So what we have to recognize is that right out of the Pentagon, there's billions and billions of research dollars that blends with private companies. And so when someone has a really good idea, I think it's important for them to take a look at alternative ways to get their funding put together. That's one of the things that everybody's going to ultimately describe. You know, well, how do I pay for this? How do I get the funding? Well, the same way everybody else is doing it, and that is learning how to maneuver through the political maze and learn that there's funds that are available in the Department of Energy, for example.
Michael, we're going to come back, Dr. Michael, we're going to come right back with you in just a moment. Let me play this song, and it is 5 o'clock, and you're listening to WGXC, the afternoon show, with your hosts, Randall Martin and
Kimberly Y. Irwin.
All right, we're going to play just a tiny bit of music, and we're going to come back with Just Save That Thought with COVID and technology and seeking funding and where you can get it. We'll be right back, folks, with this important conversation. Stay tuned.
I hope you're recording this.
Just save that thought with COVID and technology and seeking funding and where you can get it. We'll be right back, folks, with this important conversation. Stay tuned. And we are back with this extensive conversation. We have gone from entrepreneurialism into brain hacking, into all sorts of things that people need to understand about how the future is going to play out, and especially how that may offer opportunities in business. And right before we took a pause for the cause, a little station ID, Dr. Roberts was talking about how businesses, and matter of fact, people don't remember that the internet was actually funded and developed by the U.S. military, and was deployed and got on the college campuses, and now we use it, and it's known as the World Wide Web. But it was an initial design and application by the military. I don't know how people feel about now having to integrate their ideas, but it is a great source of funding, the U.S. government. But it is certainly an alternative depending on what you're working on. But Dr. Roberts, can you please continue?
During the Obama era, I was placed on the National Advisory Council for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and I actually sat with the Secretary of Commerce, Steve Case, the founder of AOL, some venture capitalists, some angel capitalists, a couple of entrepreneurs and government people. And it was about 24 of us, so we met for about 3 months trying to determine what is it that we can do to bring insourcing jobs. In other words, jobs that have been outsourced, how do you bring them back in? And one of the things that I discovered, there was only 2 blacks on this large commission, and the other one was the dean of the business school at Howard. So I was the only entrepreneur there, and he was black. And one of the things that stuck out in my mind, and I wrote about this in my new book, was that we had presidents of MIT, Georgia Tech, all of these, Michigan University, all of them were represented, and I could hear all of them saying the same thing, and that is they were trying to find money for their research departments at their universities.
Okay.
And I'm sitting there saying, well, where are the HBCU's research departments? And are they getting any of these funds from time to time? And I learned that only a couple had actually got there, but not at the magnitude that I'm seeing the larger white institutions. So I think part of what we can look at is building up a larger technology research division at our HBCUs, so the bright minds that are there will have an opportunity to create create their ideas and test them and have them funded. What I also learned was after something that I did in Houston, and that is we recognized that there was a need for a nexus, a connection between the university's inventions and the private sector.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one that sticks out was the University of Florida, the Gators. What was that? They produced a product that became very successful. And that little product was called Gatorade. So Gatorade came out of Florida Gators University, right?
I did not know
who
that.
holds the patent for that? My point is, as we look at, I mentioned earlier, the Pentagon and research there, but I'm also pointing to the fact that there are tremendous amounts of financial resources available for our colleges and universities, but we really have to make sure that our HBCUs are not stuck in that old traditional, let me study sociology and philosophy and da-da-da. All of that's important from a liberal arts degree perspective. But at the same time, let's push more of them into the tech side of things so that they're able to use their thoughts. And so many kids, they have such great ideas that, if they want to improve cybersecurity, for example, they can learn how to do that and develop that, or even if in the esports, developing games that could become, Olympic level or even gaming opportunities. They can make billions of dollars for themselves. What's the next entertainment concept for Netflix? It's not going to be, going out and shooting traditional movies. It's going to be technology-driven screens, and it's going to look real, but it's going to all be done, inside of inside of an office, if you will. Or
you're absolutely right. And you lead into the next level of conversation, which I want to bring Bill in on, Bill Hughes, and that's venture cap. I mean, obviously, all these ideas, whether it be funding from the government or private institutions, they all involve money that the regular entrepreneur does not have, especially when you're talking technological firms, and people don't realize that many of these tech companies, and including Google, they went a decade and made $0. And when you're deploying a new technology or on the cusp of something new, you may have to really go quite a while before you're able to monetize that idea. So you need some sort of consistent funding and venture cap funding to be able to roll out that idea, and especially if you want to be able to protect your place in the marketplace. And so I want to bring Bill in on this conversation. He's working, as we spoke about before, he's working in the medical marijuana field, which is actually one of the fields, and hemp. But that's also one of the fields that's actually throwing off quite a bit of funds in all the places that has been deployed, like Colorado and all these other states, Massachusetts, that have raised millions and millions and close to billions of dollars in the short time that they've had this industry. So, Bill, for those who do not know you, Mr. Hughes, can you give a little introduction to yourself and what you've been up to?
So thank you very much for inviting me. I wish I should have joined earlier because I absolutely enjoyed the conversation so far that Dr. Roberts has put forth, and hopefully we're recording this because he's putting forth a lot of gems for people. It's information that you're going to want to listen to a couple of times because it's quite deep, actually.
Absolutely, and you can find it on WGXC. You can go to the archives if you've missed the show or you're just tuning in at the 5 o'clock hour. You can always tune in and check the archives of the afternoon show for this date, and you can hear the full conversation.
And before I get into the cannabis, Randall, because I wanted to respond, there was a lot of things that he put out there that I knew, and I bring it down to the micro level for our kids.
Excuse me, I'm gonna have to step in here because you didn't share who you were, so I'll do that.
Thank you, Kim.
And then we can get into being in the living room talking. Okay, so this is Hudson, born and bred, longtime elected official and budding entrepreneur, New York State Democratic Committee man, co-founder of TIVA Growth, which is a cannabis startup, which he's going to share with us. Former City of Hudson alderman and the former minority leader of the Columbia County Board of Supervisors. So Bill is no stranger, and he goes by one of many names. So I guess we're calling him Bill today. Okay, Mr. Hughes, share with us what you will, and be very open. Our guests would love to have a conversation too with you as you share some same interests and ideas.
Absolutely. So on the tech end first, Dr. Roberts brought up a lot of great things. If we were looking at our kids in school right now, you look at the curriculum, right? It's focused top in English and history, and then we have a couple of years of math, couple of years of science and 8 electives. We should be top and heavy on tech, coding, anything to do with tech. And the reason why it speaks to a lot of the things that Dr. Roberts brought up, and you as well, Randall, is there's going to be nothing more valuable in the next 25 years than big data. And when you look at big data, and I've been actually dabbling around in this to do stock investments. But when you look at big data, all these technologies that we're talking about, autonomous cars, flying drones, having, where you have these microchips in it to be able to send to you, it's all going to be driven by big data. And there's going to be niche big data, and there's going to be big data. Who's mining that data? That's why you have companies now that are going public like Snowflake and becoming instant billionaires because they're banking on mining all this data. So data mining and understanding big data is going to be super important. And it's going to be very important that, our young kids of color understand that and are able to take advantage of that. Now, some of the things that they could get to right now, again, Dr. Roberts mentioned, we are already deploying on drones in a lot of aspects of county government right now. So when we go out and we do land surveys, we use a drone. When we do a lot of our sheriff flybys, we use drones. We're using them for some of our fire apparatus. So we're already using drones in the county level. And I think it's going to fall down to some of the smaller municipalities eventually. So and the person that is flying these drones, they're sitting in the office in some cases 20 miles away, some cases 100 miles away. So it's not like you actually you have to live in that particular community,
right,
to have that job. Also, when you're looking at on the municipal level, you start talking about the way we handle documents, files, the way we pay our taxes. All of these things are going to change within the next 5 to 10 years, right? for example, if you want to pay your taxes online in the city of Hudson right now, you go on your computer or your phone and you go on their app and you have to pay a 25% surcharge to pay this. Eventually, you're just going to
What?
use.
Is that true?
Yeah, it's true.
25% surcharge on your taxes?
Yeah, it's really high.
I'm going to interject. Even McDonald's, and I know, Will, that's where you got your start in working when you were in school. Fast
Actually, Burger
food.
King, but yes.
Well, I mean, in fast food.
Yeah.
But there was a student that I just recently spoke to who was trying to find out how she would get paid, and I didn't understand. And she said that McDonald's right now only supplies you with your salary via direct deposit. So if you didn't have account, and she's in high school,
Right.
she would not be able to receive her money. So she would have to get one of those medians, go betweens, and they cost like 5% of whatever they put into a credit card account or the.
So no more checks at McDonald's. You don't
So
get
no more checks. So this is right. You're right. So go ahead.
Right. And so when people go to pay their taxes or any other bills, eventually that's going to go to, because right now you're paying more for the security of it than you are for the actual transaction. That's why the cost is so high. But once blockchain kicks in, and trust me, there are a lot of blockchain companies. As many companies that are fighting for big data, you have that same amount of companies fighting around blockchain technology because of the safety of it. And so it will be an easy swipe. In fact, you have a company that is called Swipe that would probably penetrate a lot of the government agencies right now, and you will be able to pay your bills through them, and it's going to be relatively inexpensive. Again, but there are niche technologies out there. For example, if someone came up with a way for our food trucks or our small businesses around the community that are mobile to able to take benefit off of this technology, right? That's something that somebody who is really entrepreneurial could think about that right now.
So vendor to vendor, where they can just pay and eliminate. But the promise of blockchain is that you can eliminate so many of those different layers of transactional fees that you have. And so you're saying,
So I was even thinking about and I'll put it out there. I was thinking about a business idea myself, and I was going to call it Lockbox. And here, think about this: when you looking for your documents, say your marriage license, or let's say you get a passport and or some documents that you don't use on a daily basis, but that you like to have access to when you want them. If you're able to virtually lock them into a box somewhere and able to call them on demand, right? You no longer have to have the physical copy. You can have the digital copy, and it could be secure because it will be delivered over a blockchain.
Well, I would support something like that because I think with the future, as we go future technology, we're also going future with not being sure of our weather patterns. And you see right now, so many people losing their homes. What are they losing also? Their documents.
Yeah.
We used to have those very good safes, but they're not going to go wade back through all that turmoil in California, where my friends live, to look for their safe. They're not going to do it. So yes, that would be an ideal company started.
But you need some sort of certification to make sure that those documents are authentic. Most places that you go, including DMV, will not take a facsimile, or they need the original document in order to have that.
That's where government has to.
So you have to have some sort of certification that document is
Randall,
approved.
that's
And
all gonna
blockchain
go
can do
away.
that.
In 5 to 10 years, that's all going to go away.
I agree. I agree.
Government is going to catch up with the technology. We usually lag about 10 to 15 years behind, and that technology is already being deployed. So government is already behind. It's going to catch up.
Yeah, just so authentication is going to be the key. So if you can come up with a way that you can provide that authentication, then there you go. You're probably a billionaire.
And you can do that already.
If you can get that information out there, and you can harness that technology. Now, one of the things you were leading up to, and part of your introduction was, a lot of these companies, a lot of these ideas while big and small all do have to have a degree of startup capital. While you're building these things, you need to live someplace. You need to, you need to maybe employ people and buy computers and have high-speed internet. So there needs to be time to ramp up. And I know that right now in tech, there's not a lot of investment in Black companies in tech. And so how do we get those, HBCs or other monies? I mean, money's not really the problem. There's plenty of money out there, but how do you get them channeled to Black entrepreneurs so they can come up with these ideas and execute them in the community? I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to ask, bring back Mr. Roberts.
So what I found personally is you're right. There's a lot of money out there. We would call the lack of access to capital for Black entrepreneurs is pretty sparse. And I think that there's a couple of reasons for that, Randall. One, there is the implicit bias in racism, but there is also an inherent fear. When you're going into a community of these people that have a lot of money, they just shy away from people of color, mainly because they just don't know you. Now, here's where you're able to break through that barrier. At least I've been able to get to that point up until where I am right now, is if you're able to show them that you have a really competent team with a really solid business plan that is going to have a good ROI, which is return on investment,
right,
they're willing to give you a listen. I'm not saying that they're going to, but you can get your foot in the door. But right now, at this point, what I found is that you have to be extra over your white counterparts. And some people may get offended at that, but I'm right now in the rooms asking, and we have to be extra. I see people going in and asking for, and their business plans aren't even close to ours, and they're walking out with millions. And then when we go in and somebody that, we'll hear, well, we might give you a pilot or a simple flight and see how things work out.
And that's a tactic. I mean, a lot of times a company will underfund you and know that that's not going to be enough. But obviously now they have an interest in your business or maybe a major controlling interest, and you fail out, and then they keep the idea and then they make it fruitful. And so I living with undercapitalization has been one of the issues as an entrepreneur that I face, and I'm sure many do. Mr. Roberts, capitalization, venture cap. You did a lot of big projects. Obviously, you've been at the table to get these projects financed. With strategies, how do we get it done?
Well, it's a great question, and I think Brother Hughes has given some interesting points there to weigh in and consider. When I built my wireless phone company, at the beginning of it, they needed 100 million. I needed 100 million. It was impossible. I went to Wall Street, let's say, and I talked to the bankers up there, and I told them about this thing called digital phones. It was still analog phones, and they laughed so hard that I had to pick them up off the floor, put them back in their chairs.
Oh.
But as I went through this and spoke with other affiliates who were white, I asked them, well, how are you getting this thing financed? And they enlightened me on something I didn't know about it. It's called vendor financing. Sure enough, as I looked at both Lucent and Nortel, those are competitors. Nortel immediately was saying, well, we'll give you $1 of loan for every dollar you put up. And by that time, the cost of building it was more like $54 million. Now, in this particular story, and I write about it in my book, there's a situation where Nortel had built Sprint's St. Louis and Kansas City facilities and just assumed that all the rest of Missouri was going to become Nortel products. You follow me?
Yep.
That's their antennas, transmitters, and so they knew that once they got their equipment on the ground forever, the maintenance and supplies that would be necessary to repair them would be through their type of equipment. well, when I spoke to Lucid, I said to them, listen, I control all of Missouri except for St. Louis and Kansas City. How would you like to be in Sprint's backyard? That is the state of Missouri. They went for it, and I said, I need 54 million, and they gave me the 100% of it. There's that fake it till you make it story.
Wow.
At any rate, so we use that to build our company. Vendor financing. There may be something like that still available in certain technology related companies. But as we look at the capital funds and the angel capital, of course, they want large percentages of your business. But they also have exit strategies where you can buy them out if you're successful. I think that if we look at how we can convert the mindset of, for example, SBA, if we can convert the mindset now with a different person in charge, a different president, where, for example, right now, many of us received this PPP money, right?
Right.
Many companies receive that. And it's a forgivable loan, right?
Mhm.
So just do the things you're supposed to do and it's forgivable. But also at the same time, and that came through Treasury, at the same time, there was loans made directly to us by SBA that had no interest accruing for a year, and then you start your payments for 20 years after that, low interest to SBA. Well, the only problem I have with that is that just was another layer of debt when it's all said and done at a time when you don't have the revenues to support it anyway. And even a year from now, you're not going to have it. So what we need to be able to do is politically have the Congressional Black Caucus and others stand up and say, those loans should be forgiven SBA. And we should also look at how we can create more grants to recover under the CARES Act from this Corona debacle that has created so many businesses to go belly up. So I say to you, what we need to do then is take a lemon and turn it into lemonade, so to speak. Let's use all of these negatives that have taken place, and let's find ways and look at how, all these large contracts went to so many of the president's buddies. There were contracts. These were not loans. These were straight out gifts, as far as I'm concerned, to go out and help support their business and keep their businesses afloat. And we heard the stories of how many of our Black businesses did not receive any of the payroll protection program, PPP money.
I was about to say that. And a lot of them,
we need to figure ways to get more of that into our system. I was going to say that.
Because a lot of them told me that one of the issues was credit, like their credit requirements was pretty, were pretty stringent, I guess. And a lot of people told me that they couldn't meet those credit requirements, so they didn't get the money. And so they were out of the loop. Now I know that Chase Bank and the NBA and other big companies.
Right.
No, go ahead.
The PPP money specifically was made available for those who had poor credit or no credit.
That's not the feedback I got.
I'm just letting you know that if you read the documents, it waives all credit requirements. It only shows that you were in a business, that you had X number of employees, and you were affected by the coronavirus. Like if you had a barbershop or a restaurant or a hotel, that you were eligible regardless of your credit background.
Really?
That particular money.
That's not the feedback that I got, but that's good news.
And I'd like to add that I was sharing with people that I know that I ended up helping to get involved in it a little bit too late, unfortunately, with the first round, some Warren Street businesses in Hudson. One of the problems also was not having a bank that you are connected to initially. A lot of our businesses do cash. They don't really, have an established banking account that has, lots of money in it, or they don't do enough business with a bank for them to then feel comfortable going into a bank and getting that PPP through the bank. So I look at one of the hopes is to have more businesses, more banking institutions and establishments to help with those types of grants and giving people money as in loans and small micro loans, because a lot of this entrepreneurship comes from small businesses, and not small businesses 500,000 or more, but small businesses less than $50,000. So I think that's important too.
Well,
So
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bill. I was going to say that I know that Chase had set up I think it was a huge multi-billion-dollar loan fund. I know that the MBA. I know that there's many companies out there that are making money available to Black businesses, and hopefully we can get that list. You know how easy it is to get, and there's a whole nother question, Bill.
So I was going to say, first and foremost is, a lot of the things that President-elect Biden put out there, we would love to have, and it's a wish list, but unless we control the Senate, most of it won't come to fruition. That's one. But two, and with this 10 or $100 billion that they were talking about infusing into the Black community, I've been reviewing that. And if they were to push that money through the SBAs, it will get to some Black businesses, but it would have very little penetration, I believe. A lot of your smaller businesses who aren't familiar with the paperwork, and that's another conversation, talking about the education and how to go about, applying for this stuff. But I think a whole segment of the Black and brown community will struggle with trying to get at these monies if you run it through an SBA program. I think you should have.
I think so.
Well, I think that you should have established or newly established nonprofit organizations that are established by people of color who know the communities in which they live,
right,
with real protocols in place, so that money would have real penetration. That's the only way that you're gonna reach down to the micro level. But that being said, if they're able to, eventually get some of that money into a budget, and God willing, and able to, put a program in place, they probably will. The easiest way would be to do SBAs, but I'm telling you, that's not the way. If you want to get deep penetration, that's not going to be the way to do it.
I agree.
Let me comment on that just for a moment. You're right. The bureaucracy of SBA is ridiculous. It doesn't have to be that way. It is that way. But if you get the right administrator in there, and they take on, maybe the will of the other side of Congress, the House, we may be able to see some changes. However, I think there's other ways for money to come out. We've already seen it can come out through Treasury directly. One of the examples, to your point, Bill Hughes, is in Atlanta when Andy Young and Killer Mike Reardon, and the brother that sold Bounce TV, set up Bank Greenwood, which is a virtual Black bank, for mortgages and cars and things along that line. That was just set up within the last 60 days.
Yeah, I see it.
And that's one that's in the community. They know, they know the folks, and if we can get, programs like the PPP program and appropriate loan money coming from the feds into that bank, that would be an example that you put out that folks who understand us can be in a position to loan us the money appropriately.
That's exactly right. So to why you really want me here to talk about Randall, is what I'm working on now. I spent my time in government, and I was able to get a great deal of education, and the connections actually really helped. I partnered with a Latino gentleman, and we are a cannabis startup. So we're looking, and we're pretty ecstatic. We're looking to apply for several retail licenses in several states, starting with New Jersey, given that they just passed their bill to legalize cannabis. We were going to start in New York. I live in New York, and I'm still gonna apply in New York, but New Jersey is where we're gonna head first.
Okay.
And we're not sure how many licenses we're gonna apply. And this is why. When the market first came out, even in New York State, you had to have $250,000 per application. You had to have $2 million in escrow.
Right.
And when you applied, and if you weren't chosen, they still kept 10,000 of it. I don't know many Black people that have that kind of. So it became very difficult. Thus, you only had one Black-owned company in New York State, and they sold their license almost immediately as soon as they got it, and turned a little bit of a profit. So the industry right now runs right about 5% people of color,
Wow.
and the capital barrier is why. Now, so I want to go back to one of the things that Dr. Roberts talked about when he was talking about lender capital. Well, that's playing well because, as you know, cannabis is not, specifically marijuana, is not legal federally. So you aren't able to utilize any kind of federal or banking programs. So all the money you raise is going to be either private equity or some kind of, fund of some friends that you may have. So when my partner and I first established ourselves, we connected with some people that were pretty high up in the cannabis industry, and they loved our pitch and what they thought we had to offer. And so they were like, oh, absolutely. We'll fund you. We'll give you X amount of dollars for, X amount of years. And you guys do what you do. And social equity is going to be really big in the industry. You only have to sign this agreement that you agree to sell yourselves to us in 2 years for 2X. And I was like, wait, what?
You build it for them and then they take it over.
Right, knowing that the average company in the industry is selling for around 10X. And if people don't know 10X is 10 times the value of the company at the time. So when you get a license, depending on whether it's cultivation or dispensary, a dispensary license, on a yearly basis is averaging about 7 million. So 2X will be 14, 10X is 70 million. So they wanted us to sell our company to them if we got a license for anywhere from 7 to 10 or so $1 million. About time you pay your interest to the tax and all that, you walk away with maybe 500,000 if you're lucky. And we were like, go pound salt, basically is what we told the guy.
Wow. So and this is the sort of, and I've run across this, and I'm sure you have, Mr. Roberts too, on different levels where you get predatory companies that won't provide funds, but they're really after you, and they don't really care about the health of your company. They really want your idea, and you build the company, you build the asset, and then they take it over, through the various means. How do you sort of protect yourself when borrowing money, like from vendors or someone like that, because they also understand that we have limited other sources, so that they can be a little bit more predatory, and because we don't have options.
Well, let me say that on the cannabis side, it's very interesting because we've gone after a few applications as well. We went after 2 grows and 2 dispensaries in Missouri for $30,000 that was non-refundable. We teamed up with one of the large companies in Colorado, and we still found that no Black company got it in Missouri, and now there's a lot of lawsuits. I mean, we had a great package. We also had one in Texas, and in the entire state of Texas, they issued like 3 licenses for the whole state, mind you. So all of it is very politically driven. If you've got the governor in your pocket, you've got a great shot at getting these. I was also involved with the folks in Maryland, and that was another example where no grows were issued. I think it was 15 licenses, and I met with several of the state reps, and they've gone back to try to get another 5 licenses approved. And that's still, I don't know where we stand now, but It's very, 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 very political. They'll tell you it's transparent. They'll tell you that, it's based on the best. But, you write a proposal, you use professionals who've won in the past, you write your proposal, and everybody else is using some of the same professionals in the same proposal. So it's not a whole lot of difference, between one and the next. But it is if you got the political juice, and of course, as you the white folks controlling that level of politics. So,
That said, we should talk, Dr.
but
Robert.
it's a great business if you can get in.
Now, Bill, you were saying that early in some of the earlier iterations of the way that the bills were coming down in New York, there were specific set-asides for minority business in
Well,
the industry.
let's clarify that. So you can't specifically set aside a license for ethnic purposes, right?
Okay, all right.
So what you can do is you can set aside licenses for social equity categories, and how they break out social equity. Then you will see where they'll say, okay, you must live in an area that was affected by the war on drugs, and disproportionately. And so when you look at those areas generally disproportionately are Black or brown.
Mm-hmm.
So, or you'll say you must be a person that was formerly incarcerated under a cannabis offense. Again, 85% of the people in the country, are people of color. So you try to get at people of color through those categories without saying you're setting license aside for, a Black or brown person. Now, that said, this was tried in California. This was tried in Massachusetts, Michigan, and also Illinois. And Illinois came the closest with a pretty decent plan, social equity plan. But at the end of the day, even that flopped because they hired KPMG to score the applications. And you had a lot of white companies bring people on, meaning people of color, as minor minority owner.
Right.
And when the bid process went out, out of the 75 license, 21 companies were being put into the lottery. Only one of them was a real Black owned or brown owned company. So they had the right intention, but once they hired KPMG and put it in other people's hands, it didn't come out well.
Well, how do we get a piece of this pie? Because
so Dr. Roberts spoke to New York and about the political connections, and i.e., I just happen to
Have some.
I do, right? I happen to have some, and in several states. So I've been playing in a few states late, for about a year and a half. New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, primarily, because I want to be centralized in the tri-state area first. And my partner, what started in the tech sector, he started a couple of startups, sold them, and then got into the academics. So he's known for creating world-class incubators. And he's actually running a tech incubator as we speak right now in Baruch College for underserved communities and people of color. So he and I partnered up, and we found that one of the biggest hurdles with the cannabis industry, especially dealing with people, the social equity population, is the lack of education. All of this stuff that Dr. Roberts is talking about, right? P&Ls, right? Learning your profits and loss sheets,
right.
ROI, learning your, return on investments, how to actually build out a business, how to run it, all these kinds of things. We have a lot of people in the Black and brown community who understand cannabis better than all of us, right? They've been running an illicit market for 100 years. What they don't understand is the regulatory stuff that will trip them up and that will keep them out of the business on top of the financial hurdles. So my partner and I said, you know what? On top of us actually applying for licenses and to running a retail and grow operation, we're going to develop on the back end, because look, I want to make money but I also want people in my community to make money too. And I don't want us to always be the consumer. We should also have the opportunity to be the entrepreneur.
Absolutely.
So we said, we're going to create a program, an educational program that would give people a base foundation. That's understanding strains, that's understanding basic accounting, that's understanding all your different rules and regulations. And we created 3 tracks. The first track would be for people with non-GED to GED or a high school diploma. The second track would be people with high school diploma to an associate's degree. And the third track would be for people who had higher education that were looking to be entrepreneurs immediately. And you would pursue one of these tracks. And let's say you were a high school graduate and you didn't want to go to college. Our program is not a college program. It would be a credentialed program where you would get a certificate. But let's say you wanted to go there, you went there and you learned how to become a bud tender and you went and worked in a dispensary. And you did that for 3 or 4 years. We also wanted to partner with community colleges. I've already taught the colleges like community, like Columbia Green and CUNY Downstate and some of the other ones. So say you wanted to move on and you'll say, okay, I'm going to take this certificate that I have to be a bud tender, and I'm now going to transfer over into Columbia Green Community College and get my associates in cannabis management.
Now, would these classes be a prerequisite to working with your company should you get these licenses, or would they be, if you were doing business with them, would it be mandatory? How did you figure to sort of roll out these educational elements?
Right. So we've been working pretty closely with New York State and trying to tailor our program around what it is they wanted.
Right.
But to the mandatory end, a lot of states weren't making the education mandatory, and they were finding out that when they would put licenses in the hands of these people who were social equity owners, which we would be as well, 90%, even the ones who got licenses, 90% of them failed, either because of the lack of capital or the lack of education around running a business in a highly regulated industry.
Right.
So if you know, and a lot of the states now are talking about that. If you look at New Jersey, they're talking about, we're going to give conditional licenses. Social equity is going to be at the root of this. We're going to have micro licenses. They're talking all the good language that you want to hear. What they aren't saying is, okay, we're going to set 30% of the license aside for that population.
Right.
That could be a substantial amount of licenses, but they're not saying that it's going to come with capital one. So that's one obstacle. And they're also not saying that these people have to have any kind of educational requirement. I mean, if you're going to expunge the sentences of a lot of people that are formerly incarcerated, and let them come right out, and then all of a sudden put a license in their hand that's worth a couple of $1 million to one of the big MSOs, multi-state operators, a lot of times these young ladies and men aren't going to have the capability to actually run a business in that industry. And so they will end up selling their license for what would be a substantial amount of money to them, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000. In the MSO.
Less. But I think that's part of the. I'm not saying that this is a scam and this is what they expect to happen.
It's predatory. It's not a scam. It's predatory.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I jump in for a second?
Absolutely.
What was the example you just gave? Was the same thing happened when riverboat casinos were hitting cities. They would say that we want a minority partner, and as soon as they got it built, they'd pay off the partner and own 100% of the casinos. I have a backdoor approach for you. If you look at the history of our Black colleges and universities, agriculture was one of the core components of learning at those schools. Cannabis is agriculture. We could potentially go in and request that the state legislators grant licenses to the HBCUs that we would select. They then would have the license. They would then subcontract the license to you to actually operate and build the company with a teaching component inside of the university. Now, to make that work politically, you would want a white university to receive a license as well. So that takes a lot of the politics out of it. It puts it directly in the hands of HBCU, who in turn can do whatever they want to do with it. They will probably want you to build it and be able to provide them with $1 million of endowment on an annualized basis or something that would take place. So if we look at these things where our strengths are, and we take the position that giving these licenses to an HBCU would be a very interesting way to take the politics out of it, because it's one of those things where it would be hard for politicians to say no to, or we disagree. And then what you do is you get, I don't know, one of the large white New York universities to team up with you, who may be also interested in that concept. And,
well, Cornell is already interested, so.
Well, fine. We'll say if Cornell is the choice, then you find a comparable HBCU school that has some of the technical capabilities to at least show well on paper. If you do it that way, then and you go in with control with the school, because it's still it'd be a kind of a private public relationship, public being the school, private being you, then creating a complete business plan around it, and where the students can help with the growth. So we kind of have free labor. They can learn the marketing strategy, the security, and even to the point of cybersecurity of it, so it's protected. All of the elements that are around it could be done by students and a faculty, and then the money can be made by those of us who are in that side of the game plan. So, Brother Hughes, you might want to weigh that and consider that through your political relationships, and that may be a way to take out all the other. What is Joe?
Malarkey.
What is Joe? Oh, the malarkey.
Yeah.
That's what Joe says. So we can take out all the malarkey, and then we can then have a very specific target game plan that's a win-win, and especially if you have a state that's democratically controlled, and for that matter, the Republican control, where they want to see that, and then they don't have to get into the bickering between a lot of parties. Just grant it to a school, and grant it to another school or two, and then let them figure it out.
I bet some, I'm going to mention that to my partner. We're on a conference call next week with some of our investors. That sounds a pretty good idea. As far as us, business wise, to Randall, we're actually since we've met and we talked to 100 people or so. Funny enough, I had to pitch to so many people. It's crazy. And I'm learning on the fly. I'm really now having to learn on the fly, and catch up with my partner who's really well educated. But we're pretty good. We're pretty well positioned in New York and New Jersey for licenses. But to Dr. Roberts' point is, we don't want to grow right now because we believe when it federally goes legal, that the competition coming, especially if they break down the borders and allow interstate, coming out of Oregon and California is going to crash the price so low that if you don't have a good growth process in place, to build one of these facilities is $25 million or more. You could be looking at a real red line in a hurry. But
interesting.
Yeah, but if you're developing a product and creating a brand around your product, it doesn't matter where you get your base product from, right? I can get it from California, Oregon, even Africa, bring it back here and then infuse it into any kind of product around the brand. That's why you saw what Jay-Z just came out with Monogram, right? Monogram, his product is going to be no better than a lot of the cannabis that you're buying on the East Coast, except for it's going to say Monogram on it, which is a Jay-Z product.
Right,
And you're going to pay a premium for it.
Well, that's like Gatorade that we were talking about earlier with the Gators from Florida. You know, they had a particular product and their name really sells it more than the product itself.
Right.
Well,
And so,
go ahead. I just want to come up on the 5 o'clock
okay.
hour. So I want you to give me I want you to finish your thought. And I want you both we're going to go into a lightning round. We got about 7 minutes left. And give me your top 5 or 10 business thoughts for entrepreneurs.
3 or 5.
3 or 5. I'll keep it short. I think the cannabis industry is going to really grow on the East Coast. New Jersey is first, obviously. New York is going to be close behind, where they're going to probably legalize in around April of 2021. And Philadelphia is going to follow that, and Connecticut is going to be very close to that. So you're going to have 4 states that legalize all within the next year, I believe.
And all Democratic with the Democratic.
All Democratic, but that's irrelevant, I think. Like Dr. Roberts said, you do have to have some connections, either with the politicians or people who know the politicians. You need to have somewhat of a business foundational background, and you need to be able to talk to people freely, go in without any pretensions, where you can get access to capital. You got to get people to trust you, because under this current market right now, banks aren't available to you.
Okay. Mr. Roberts.
Yes. Well, you know, I spoke heavily earlier about the whole concept of the futuristic businesses. I will say that anybody who's in the top 10% of their profession, you know, the best performers will probably be protected almost regardless of what you do. I just think that whatever you choose, I mean, realize that people are always going to have need a place to live. So, you know, real estate development with a population that's growing, living longer is still a one of the staples that have always been around. It's not going any place. We'll see shopping change. You know, you'll probably, I mean, we've already seen what Amazon has done to some of the mom and pop stores that are out here. That's always a difficult challenge to figure out how to compete with, you know, those types of giants. I think elderly care will continue to be a growing business opportunity. You've got about 75 million baby boomers who are out here who are living longer. So it's what I would call end of life management. You know, that's another business opportunity. I'm coming away from, you know, some of these other big ideas, you know, that I talked about in terms of technology, drones, and I didn't even get into genome designing of children, where they'll actually be able to go in and change your genes and cut out things like cancer genes and other components. And someday you'll be able to choose what kind of baby you want with artificial body.
Well, we're gonna have to have you come back to talk about.
Yeah, I just.
What about green? What about Joe's green plan? Not green in terms of marijuana, but green in terms of climate. You know, climate stabilization in terms of green jobs, solar, wind, those technologies. What do you think about that?
Well, no, I completely agree with that. I kind of touched on it very early, but you know, the whole idea of converting your property to move from, remember what I said earlier, moving from fossil fuels to renewable energy concepts. Absolutely. I took my hotel here and I greened it. I have every light fixture and light bulb. Light fixture important are LEDs. All the toilets have been changed to low water consumption. My parking lot is solar paneled. And you know, when you convert these, you know, you bring your energy costs down, and and therefore the use of fossil fuels begin to diminish quite a bit.
Okay,
I think
guys.
people who
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, inside of your house, you'll be able to have levels of artificial intelligence that'll help you manage, your energy consumption on a personalized basis. Of course, I mentioned earlier electric cars, that takes away the fossil fuel components. So that's yet another consideration.
Well, I think people are going to have to get
this
your book.
planet is important.
Think
Sorry?
you've got a plethora of great things in business to talk about, and your terminology was being an actionaire, right?
Yes.
Action
And the
has
title
no
of the book-
season.
Say it again.
Action has no season.
That's right, 2.0.
And 2.0, yes.
So we
Be an
definitely
actionaire.
need you to come back here. We're running out of time for this great conversation. But this has been very enlightening. Tell us again where we can get your book in only 30 seconds. And Bill, if people want to find out more about you, how can they get a hold of you? 30 seconds each.
For me,
Yes.
just email me. My email, if anyone knows, is W for William, C for Charles, H for Henry, J for James, R for Rodney, N for Nancy at yahoo.com. And
All
Dr.
right.
Robert, you and I should talk.
Let's
Absolutely.
do.
Dr. Robbs, how do people get your book or find out more about the exciting things that you are up to and speaking about? And we got.
Well, my book is again entitled Action Has No Season.
Okay.
And Action Has No Season 2.0, which can be purchased easily on Amazon. Just type in Michael B. Roberts. Also, if you want to hear more of my speeches and some of my futuristic concepts, just go to YouTube and type Michael B. Roberts, and you'll be able to see more and hear more about some of the things that I've been speaking on today.
Okay,
Well,
Kimberly.
I
Take us
will.
out. We got 15 seconds.
I will just say thank you to both the guests, and I got some people who said they need to know more, so they will be looking you up very shortly.
Sounds
Thank
good.
you. See you next week.